pause button. This case is to be dismissed. Of course, the Supreme Court reviewed this case at length this year over the issue of presidential immunity and granted Trump some version of presidential immunity. Jack Smith went back to a second grand jury, got a second indictment on the same felony charges to bring this case after the Supreme Court's determination. Now he's saying, drop the case.
And so this has more to do with the fact that Trump won the election than it has to do with the merits of the case. Jack Smith isn't saying anything about whether he believes in these charges or not.
Yeah, the argument Jack Smith's making is a procedural one, that because he is going to be the president-elect, because on January 6, 2025, he'll be certified as the winner. On January 20th, he'll be inaugurated, that the policy is clear. You can't bring criminal cases against a sitting president. He's not making an argument that he believes his case has been weakened, that his case has any flaws, or that there's a problem with evidence. It's just that he can't try a sitting president.
And Smith is assuming his days are numbered, right?
Donald Trump has made explicit and unequivocal that he would fire Jack Smith, I think, within minutes or seconds of taking office if Jack Smith doesn't stand down on his own before January 20th. This case was going to end either way. And it's worth noting, Nancy, there were some deadlines between the Supreme Court ruling July 1st and Election Day that Jack Smith kind of let come and go. I think recognizing that this case was going to rise or fall with the election, that the case wasn't going to happen if Trump won. So he almost hit the brakes a bit later in this year, waiting for the election results. And here they are. And his motion to dismiss follows, just 3 weeks after the election.
Scott MacFarlane, thank you so much for breaking it down for us. I appreciate it. I want to go now to Nicole Killion, who is in West Palm Beach, Florida, covering the president-elect. And Nicole, I assume this is going to be welcome news to Mr. Trump.
Yeah, I think that is a fair assumption, Nancy, because we certainly know that the president-elect has had his criticism of Jack Smith and called this entire case a witch hunt among the many cases and charges that he has faced over the last couple of years. But this is certainly a noteworthy move on the part of Jack Smith, although we are still waiting to see if Judge Chutkan grants this request. As of now, we have not seen any reaction from the president-elect on his Truth Social account or through any other means. But as you say, this will likely be met with a lot of relief on the part of the president-elect. I think it's also worth noting, certainly, that there is the election interference case that is still pending in Georgia, which continues to be on ice. So unclear whether or not this federal case will have any bearing on that state case down in Georgia as well.
So one less criminal case to worry about, possibly. Nicole Killion in Florida, thank you. I want to bring in Jessica Levinson, CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor. Her work focuses on constitutional law, election law, and the Supreme Court. Jessica, so good to have you with us. So does this mean that Donald Trump no longer has to worry about this case at all? It goes away completely?
Almost certainly. As Nicole just said, we're going to wait for Judge Chutkan, the trial court judge here, to say yes or no when it comes to this request to dismiss the case. I think the chances are extremely high that the judge says yes, in part because of all the reasons that Jack Smith lays out in this 6-page filing. In part because there's some question about whether or not she even has the discretion to say no, and frankly, who she could even appoint to continue prosecuting the case. I think all of this points to the idea that Jack Smith and others saw where this was going and decided, for the reasons that you've been talking about, because the president is different from the rest of us, because continuing with a criminal case against a sitting president is something that we have not envisioned, that Jack Smith said, no, I'm dismissing this. As Scott said, interestingly, there's nothing here that says, let's hold it in abeyance. Let's stay until the end of the presidential term. This is, we are dismissing. And therefore, to your question, I think this means this is off of the worry list for Donald Trump, unless there's some strange situation where they would try to refile. I think that would be very unlikely at the end of the presidential term.
And Jessica, why do you think that is, that they didn't propose hitting pause? I mean, we saw in the hush money case in New York just a week or two ago that the prosecutors there said, okay, wait, maybe you wait to sentence Donald Trump until 2029. Maybe we just wait for 4 years. But that's not what Jack Smith is saying.
That's not. And this is such an important question. And I think it's due to a couple of things. One is where this case is. And Jack Smith is saying even the idea, as we've quickly read this filing, even the idea that this could be hanging over the president's head for the entirety of his administration, that's the type of burden that we want to guard against. Now, where's the New York case? There's frankly, I think, very little hanging over the president's head in comparison. That is a situation where the jury has already convicted him, and the only question is one of sentencing. There's not a question of, will we proceed to trial? What will the trial look like? Will he have to sit as a criminal defendant? And will there be any motion practice during a presidential administration? So those particular cases are at very different places. Again, when it comes to the D.C. election interference case, obviously never even went to trial. Now we think it never will. The New York case went to trial and the jury convicted. Much less for the president to do other than just to sit there for a sentencing potentially in 4 years. And let's remember a sentencing where it's very unlikely that he would get any time in prison.
That is such an important distinction, and part of the reason that Jack Smith had been pushing for so long for a speedy trial in this case. Jessica Levinson, legal expert, thanks so much. I want to go now to CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. Weijia, President Biden has a history of refusing to weigh in on President-elect Trump's legal troubles, and in fact, these days, he seems to avoid weighing in on his successor at all.
Nancy, that's right. You know, recently President Biden hosted President-elect Trump here at the White House for a meeting that lasted just about 2 hours. And after that, we have heard very little from President Biden himself about what they spoke about, any notes that he passed along, any agenda items that he wanted to focus on, even though we know before this meeting during the campaign, President Biden was very clear and explicit in describing what he claimed were threats that Trump posed, even calling him a fascist at one point. And you're absolutely right. This White House, especially Biden, has gone to great lengths to separate themselves from any of Trump's legal cases, even especially this one and the ones that we have just laid out today. That doesn't mean, though, Nancy, that they haven't expressed their belief that Trump was responsible and played a role in inciting the riots that we saw on January 6th, 2021. That said, so far we have been pinging our White House officials and sources, and they have not weighed in yet on this monumental decision. But on a tangential note, Nancy, I think it is important to remind viewers what President Biden has said about the Supreme Court immunity ruling that would apply to future presidents as they acted in their official capacity. He said it was a dangerous precedent because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. But as for this decision by Jack Smith, Nancy, so far we are still waiting to hear from the White House.
Weijia Jiang at the White House. Great point. Thank you so much. And breaking news once again, special counsel Jack Smith has moved to dismiss the 2020 federal election interference case against President-elect Donald Trump. He cited a long-standing Justice Department policy shielding sitting presidents from prosecution. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington.